In this video, we'll show you how to create accrual policies for your absence types and how to assign them to the relevant employees. Accrual policies are used to define how absence entitlements accrue and get granted to your employees. They can define how many days or hours employees should get up front, such as 25 days granted on January 1st, and whether entitlements should be granted every year, half year, quarter, or month. They can also set whether absence entitlements should be prorated for part-time employees or increased or decreased at particular times, such as work anniversaries. They can also set whether days or hours can be carried over from one period to another. Step 1. Create a new accrual policy for an absence type. If you enable accrual policies when creating an absence, you must create at least one accrual policy for it. To create a new accrual policy, go to Settings, Work Hours and Absences, Absence. Find the absence type you created and click New Accrual Policy. Name it and set whether the accrual year begins on January 1st, which is recommended, or on the employee's work anniversary, and enter the annual entitlement in hours. For example, if set to January 1st, an employee who started on November 1st, 2022, for example, will initially receive 4 hours calculated like this, and then another 24 hours on January 1st, 2023. The granting method defines whether employees get the entitlement all at once or in monthly installments, either on the first or last day of each month spent at the company. If set to the start of the month, they get the entitlements on day 1, whether they work the whole month or not. If set to the end of the month for absences tracked in hours, they get the entitlement only after working the whole month. Using the same example and selecting in monthly installments at the start of the month, an employee starting on November 2nd will receive 1/12 of 24 hours, 2 hours for the remaining year. In Employment Start End, you can activate Temporary Granting Mode, and if so, define the period, for absences tracked in hours, and the number of hours granted at the end of each fully worked month during it. Temporary Granting Mode means employees with this accrual policy receive a limited entitlement for a period after their hire date, and can get the rest later. You can also define the applicable proration rule for start of employment and end of employment. If the employee's contract end date or termination date falls within their first 6 months, their absence entitlement is always prorated, whatever you set. If it falls within the second half of the year, they will always get their full absence entitlement, whatever you set, assuming you've set granting mode to all at once. In Carryover, define if employees can carry over their entitlement to the next year, and if so, how many hours and for how long. In Tenure-based rules, define if the employee's annual entitlement increases over time. If so, define the frequency, the number of granted days or hours, and also the granting moment, either the tenure anniversary or the start of the accrual policy after the work anniversary. For example, if you activate the reward extra entitlement based on tenure option and set the rule after 2 years add 24 hours, an employee joining on November 1st, 2022 will get an additional 24 hours of time off on January 1st, 2024. These rules are cumulative. So if you also add after 1 year add 24 hours, the employer will receive a total of 48 hours of time off on January 1st, 2024. Check that your configuration is correct and click Confirm and Create. Step 2. Assign the accrual policy to the relevant employees. You need to assign the accrual policy to an employee for them to see the absence type. Ensure that you're happy with the settings for your accrual policy before assigning it, as you can't edit it once it's assigned. To assign it to several employees, select them in the employee list and click Actions, Change Accrual Policy. Select the absence type and accrual policy you created and enter a date that it applies from. When assigning the accrual policy to an employee for the very first time, select the Hire Date option. Of course, you can also assign an accrual policy to an employee directly in their employee profile. Step 3. Archive or delete the accrual policy. When you no longer need an accrual policy, you can decide to either delete it or archive it. Deleting is permanent, can't be restored, and won't show anywhere in Personio. It will affect the employee's absence balances and entitlement, so all data, including any absence periods, will be permanently removed. Archiving accrual policies is also permanent and can't be restored, but it will still appear as archived and is used for any assigned employees, so it won't affect the employee's absence balances and entitlement. To delete or archive an accrual policy, go to the employee list and select all the employees it's assigned to. Click Actions, Change Accrual Policy, and select Unassigned Accrual Policies. Then go to Settings, Work Hours and Absences, Absence, select the absence type and scroll down to the accrual policy and click on either Archive or Delete. The archived accrual policy will now appear at the very bottom under Archive, but you can't assign it to any employee, while a deleted accrual policy will be removed entirely. Congratulations, you've learned how to create accrual policies for your absence types and how to assign them to your employees.